strike, and so that got canceled. But then his return to the chairmanship was further delayed as the commission has called a special meeting today to try to ensure some fiscal accountability for the county as the federal government goes through its machinations on the debt ceiling negotiations. So hopefully that will be resolved. What that means is that Chair Ruane will probably, hopefully, join us at some point before we conclude our business today. On the introductions, Tanya, do we want to go around and everybody say something like we usually do?
Sure.
All right. All right. So we do have a full room this morning. It's probably some new folks. Maybe you haven't been to this venue in this process before. So let's real quick go around the room clockwise and just introduce ourselves. I'm Matt Caldwell. I am the Lee County property appraiser.
Terry Mazzani with Collaboratory here, pleased to be a host and support the Recovery Task Force.
Robert Delalo, Fire Chief for Lehigh Acres Fire Control and Rescue District.
David Klein from Lee Health. I'm an alternate for Dave Collins.
Holly Smith, Councilwoman for the City of Sanibel.
Kevin Anderson, Mayor for the City of Fort Myers.
Bill Veach, Councilman for the town of Fort Myers Beach.
Chris Corey, Councilman for the City of Bonita Springs.
Joanne Ribble, Vice Mayor, Village of Estero, substituting for Mayor McLean.
Jenna Persons, Chair of the Lee County Legislative Delegation.
Good morning, John Gunter, Mayor of the City of Cape Coral.
Armor Persons, Chair, Lee County School Board.
Jeannie Sutton, Deputy Director, Lee County Human and Veteran Services.
Tanya Shannon Haggerty with the Recovery Task Force Support Team.
Well, I have to note we had a meeting yesterday with Mr. Persons from the school board, and they mistyped his his name on his thing. He was Amore Persons yesterday, so we definitely are glad to see that today you are Armor once again.
Because we love them.
And the lovely job you do. Okay, next on the agenda we have the approval of the minutes. Do I have any input from the members? Yes, Councilwoman Smith.
I would like to table those minutes. We received the package yesterday afternoon. I was going through and reviewing my sections and need to have some adjustments made after I was listening at the hour .1 at the meeting. So if we could table those for the next meeting for approval so I can make the corrections, I'd appreciate it. It had to do with height and it was pretty specific and want to make the correct input.
No, any objections to tabling those minutes and for Councilwoman Smith to go over them in more detail?
I would make a motion to table those to come forward at the next meeting.
All right. All right. Second, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. We will show those minutes tabled. We'll revisit them next meeting. So that takes us next to the Community Development Block Grant. And Assistant County Manager Glenn Salyer is also tied up with the special meeting of the board. So we have Jeannie Sutton, who is here to pinch hit on his behalf. And take it away. I will give you the floor.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I am going to skim through here to get to our presentation. Perfect. All right. So as the agenda mentions, we are here to talk about CDBG DR funding. I know you all have been hearing lots about that so far, but wanted to provide kind of an in-depth review of the process that is required for CDBG DR funding, as well as kind of an overview of where we are at with the process as it stands at this very moment. All right, so what is CDBG DR? So the county is getting $1.1 billion, as everyone here knows. This money is getting deployed directly to Lee County, which is wonderful. It allows us to have complete oversight and local decision-making regarding the allocation of these funds. All that being said, it does not come without strings attached. So this funding is coming directly from HUD. So all of the processes that are normally in place for states or any other entity that receives this funding do apply to Lee County as a whole. So it is not a blank check, as much as we would all love it to be. It does come with all of the HUD restrictions and especially having priority to serve low income and moderate income populations. So we'll get into in a little bit exactly what that looks like and what those income limits are. But there are, again, just want to emphasize specific eligibility requirements for all of this funding. Being that this funding does come from HUD, there is a large priority on housing specific activities with it. I won't go through every single one of these because this is a lot of information on one slide, but this is just an overview of the general life cycle of a CDBG DR grant. So you can see there's quite a bit of steps. And if you kind of go down to the middle of the third line there, the projects, as you would know them, the ones that are actually on the street doing construction or building things, those don't actually start until that third line. So just keep that in mind as we continue to go over the details of the process. All right, so rules of the road. So as I mentioned, lots of strings attached. So wanted to take a deeper dive into exactly what those strings are and how we are planning to work within the HUD requirements to ensure that this funding gets deployed. So each activity funded with CDBG-DR is required to address a disaster impact. So there has to be a tieback for every single thing that we're doing within the funding allocations. Every single amount of the funds have to be spent on a CDBG eligible activity, which we'll get into a little bit later. And they have to meet a national objective. So they have to, again, primarily serve low or moderate income persons. There is also the option to eliminate slum or blight areas and also address urgent needs with the funds. And of course, the majority of the projects that we undertake are going to have a resiliency measure built in to ensure that moving forward, whatever is constructed is more resilient than it was prior to the disaster. So income eligibility. The majority of the funds, 70% to be exact, have to be used for households that meet that 80% or below income limit. So that bottom line there, for a household of 4, that's $68,100. And that obviously varies by household size. So each household that's benefiting has to be income qualified on an individual household basis. So here are the buckets of eligible activities. Housing, again, top priority for HUD. Addition to housing is public facilities and infrastructure, economic revitalization, public services, and then planning and administration. In addition to the allocation that we received for our unmet needs, we also received an allocation of $144 million for mitigation. This is the only pot of dollars that does not have to have a hurricane tieback. So I mentioned previously, these are intended to address the unmet needs as a result of the hurricane. This pot of dollars does not have to do that. However, it does still have to meet all of the other HUD eligibility guidelines. We also have 6 years to go ahead and expend all of these grant funds. So that is approximately sometime in 2029. So how did HUD get to these allocations? So I mentioned the $144 million for mitigation. $963 million of our total was allocated to us based on our unmet needs. So HUD takes all the data from FEMA and SBA and compiles it all together to determine what our gaps in funding are based on the damages caused by the hurricane. So they started out with about $711 million as an estimate for our housing unmet need, $178 million as an estimate for business, and $73 million for infrastructure. Keep in mind, this is just a starting point. This is not how the funds will ultimately be allocated within the plan. This is just the HUD and federal level data. We will also use local data to change those numbers around based on what we know our local needs are. Awesome. So a little bit about the process. So this is at the highest level. I think you're all familiar with this. Congress appropriates the money, HUD sets the rules, and then they hand those rules and the funds down to us to implement and administer. So a little bit more detail about the process. So first step is under that process line, we are currently going through our pre-award checklist and certifications process. So this requires the county to complete a checklist for HUD and verify to them that we have adequate financial controls in place to manage the funds. After we get through that, we will submit an action plan to HUD, and then they will execute a grant agreement with us. We'll complete policies and procedures for each of the programs we've outlined within the plan, and also complete required environmental reviews for that. After that, under operations is when the projects actually get going. So from there, we will manage those projects, ensure compliance with all the HUD rules, oversee and monitor subrecipients, and then once the projects are done, we will close them out and ensure compliance with HUD. Throughout this entire process, we'll be working collaboratively with HUD to make sure that we are in compliance with all of the guidelines, and they will be here to monitor us and confirm all of that information. So a little bit more about the action plan. So this action plan stage is our next step, right? So I mentioned we're currently doing the financial certification process, and after that, we will have the action plan. So timeline of all of this. The Federal Register notice was published May 18th. Once it's published, there's 5 days before it actually goes into effect. After that, we submit those certifications I mentioned. That will be in July. And then the final action plan will be due to HUD on September 20th. HUD has 60 days after it is submitted to review it, and there may be a back and forth process with edits and corrections throughout that to make sure that we get a plan that is finally approved by HUD. So here's some detailed pieces of the action plan. I won't go into these in depth, but essentially the action plan is a broad brush overview of the projects that we intend to carry out. I do want to emphasize that the action plan is not the end all be all. It will go through several amendment processes. It does include it does include a large, a general overview of the different buckets of funding for each of those eligible project types that I went over earlier, but it will not include each individual activity that will be carried out. Those will be added over time as the program progresses. Part of the action plan process also includes public outreach. So there's various forms that will take, including the town halls that were most recently done by this group, as well as, getting feedback from the task force as a whole and all of the different branches. There'll also be online surveys. I know the task force also has an online survey. So information gathered throughout that entire public participation process will be incorporated into the plan. That's part of that unmet needs assessment and the information that is included in the plan. All right, so I mentioned this already, but just want to emphasize that the plan will be amended. HUD has told us there's a grantee that I think has amended their plan 30 or 40 times already. We're going to try to make it a little less than that, but just keep that in mind that as the program progresses, there will be changes that occur. We will be required to amend the plan, and that includes shifting funding around, changing beneficiaries, and even changing the types of projects that we're carrying out. Once the projects do get up and running, we are required to submit quarterly performance reports to HUD detailing the actual outcomes of those projects. So what can we expect next? So after the action plan is submitted and approved, there will be an implementation process. So the majority of funds will be available via an application. We call it a Notice of Funding Availability, or NOFA. Those notices of funding availability will go out in a staggered manner. The reason for that is if we put all the funding on the street right away, then agencies and municipalities and other parties who are trying to apply for it may have capacity issues in actually completing all those applications at one time. So those will be released in a staggered method so that you will have the opportunity to spend the time to complete the applications. The county, of course, will be providing technical assistance that is required as part of our CDBG-DR grant. So we'll be able to provide assistance and help completing applications, designing projects, and that sort of thing. The projects that are potentially going to be selected for funding will have to have a prioritization to serve low mod income populations. We already went over that as a priority for these funds. And then once those low mod benefit projects are awarded and we're working through those, there is a possibility for us to request a waiver to that 70% set aside. We'll have to work with HUD to see if that happens or not, but the LMI prioritization will come first. All right. As a requirement of HUD, we do have a CDBG-DR website stood up. The link for that is here. That website includes kind of an overview of the information that was covered in the presentation, the timelines, and as we continue to develop more policies and procedures and applications processes, those will be posted on the website as well. If you're really interested in learning about all the details of CDBG-DR, the top link is an interactive tool that HUD has that details all the different regulatory requirements, eligible projects, and other things related to DR. That's it.
All right, members, questions for Ms. Sutton? All right, you've satisfied all their curiosities. Very good. Thank you very much for that update. I'm sure that will be a continuing topic of conversation. All right, up next, Ms. Shannon, you have got unmet needs projects presentation.
All right. So we've been working with a lot of you all in terms of the submission of different types of projects or initiatives that are of the priorities of the jurisdictions that you represent. Thank you so much for those who've submitted. I know there's a lot of folks currently at a computer typing in and entering in the projects. Please try to have those submitted by COB end of business today. What we are doing with this is compiling the information and going towards what Jeannie was previously describing, that unmet needs assessment in terms of these are the infrastructure needs. When HUD was talking about how they did the calculation, they didn't have a lot of data on the infrastructure need for this area, which is why that number is surprisingly low. So the projects that you're submitting, whether they be for infrastructure, economic development, or for housing, will be going towards that unmet needs assessment. And so if you have any questions pertaining to that, please let us know, and we can help in resolving those and trying to get those projects in by the end of today. For those that, just kind of a reminder of what the form looks like and has been emailed to you all, and the different individuals that you asked us to CC. I highly recommend looking for projects that are not eligible under FEMA public assistance, potentially utilizing your capital improvement plans or other existing plans that can identify projects that can be submitted. And then ultimately, this will be part of that unmet needs assessment. As Jeannie outlined, there will be a formal process at a later date for different jurisdictions as yours, as well as other entities, to apply for the funding and the formal process that will be outlined at a later date. So what we are also going to be doing with the projects that you outlined to maximize the amount of funding, as Commissioner Ruane has said, HUD missed a zero, that the total amount of need in this community is going to greatly exceed the 1.1 billion. To maximize the CDBG-DR funding that the county has, we'll be looking at all the projects that you have submitted and identifying if there are other grant programs that are able to take on large portions of it, such as two that I'll be talking about in just a minute, where there may be a cost share, where CDBG-DR can be utilized as the 20% cost share, like hazard mitigation grant program. And that way it maximizes the total amount of the funding, and CDBG-DR could potentially be just a force multiplier of the funding that is brought into this area. Any questions with regards to the form or the intent?
Have submitted everything for the portal. I've
list here. Thank you. We've submitted the city of Sanibel through the portal, and we have a list of ours. Some of them do not have financing needs because it's yet to be determined. My question is, one, are we going to be able to add projects with any potential unmet needs or modify those projects that we have in place? We're all putting this together as quickly as we can, but we know there are going to be changes along the way. This is a long process, and we're still all, I'm sure, identifying the needs that we have that might not have gotten in this portal. So how will that be handled?
So for the purposes of the unmet needs assessment for the CDBGDR action plan, we're on the clock's Federal Register has been released. We're on the clock. 120 days. The action plan has to be in the hands of HUD. And the unmet needs assessment is step one, and there are many steps that need to be done. So we need dollar amounts. We need the projects to be included in that process today, so that we can get. We have a deadline to get something to Jeannie in a couple of weeks, so that they can do that step 2 through 72 in the next 120 days. For the purposes of the Resilient Recovery and Resilience Plan, we'll continue to assess the information and can provide edits and kind of any additional information, and we'll assess that for the incorporation into the plan. We'll have a date for you all, probably around August, of when we need that information by, in order for it to be included in the Recovery and Resilience Plan and that assessment of other funding streams and things along those lines. But for the unmet needs assessment, we're under the clock. So we really need that information as quickly as possible.
So does that include the dollar amount as well? In because we've got the projects, but we've still got to work with council and public input. So you need the dollar amount as well, because you'll see on many of ours it's TBD, because we're trying to get those numbers to you. And we're also looking at potentially, if we can look at, if we're going to join with another municipality, say we can look in a census tract that's low to mod, and we can combine it in that census tract for the betterment of a couple of communities. We'll need to get that to you as well. So
Yeah, it'll be ongoing in terms of, and constantly providing it to the county team as they're doing the NOFOs and identifying programs that they're going to be doing. Just the unmet needs assessment, we'll have to run with whatever we have today.
Okay.
But ongoing for the Recovery and Resilience Plan.
Okay, thank you.
I guess so my question is kind of similar. So as far as costing, because there's a lot of variables, especially if there's land acquisitions, building costs, all that. How detailed do you need that to be?
Best guess at this point. So based off of historic, or what is your experience right now with construction and things along those lines, but what is your best guess of what the costs are going to be? Understandably, there's probably going to be very round numbers and are going to be subject to change at a later date. But with what we are needing to work with the unmet needs assessment, your best guess as of right now would be beneficial to provide. And then if that evolves over time, you can submit that information to the Resiliently email, and we'll adjust and incorporate it into the final plan.
And is it better for us to overestimate or underestimate?
Best guess is, yeah.
So I think an approach, let's make sure we all put as many projects as we can on this list. And I think we do on the back of a napkin as best we can put a cost. But first and foremost, spend the bulk of your time right now identifying the projects and do the best educated guess you can on the dollar amount. But I'd like us to submit as many projects as possible.
Councilman Corey?
How does the assessment take place? What's considered during the assessment process?
For the CDBGDR assessment or for the full Recovery and Resilience Plan assessment, or both? So the question was, what is part of the unmet needs assessment? It is looking at the data that is available. We're going to be looking at a larger swath of data than HUD looked at. HUD looked at individual assistance data. So that is the FEMA program that is providing funding to individual households and families. They looked at, which is the data that was the most fleshed out at the time that HUD pulled that information. They also pulled the SBA data in terms of what are the loans that have been issued at this point for SBA. And then they pulled the public assistance data, and we were told that they did that poll December or January, December. And there was no data in December. The deadline to FEMA was in February or March, depending on when different jurisdictions had their first meeting with FEMA. So there was no data for them to pull except for a couple state agencies that had submitted their data at that point. So which is why the infrastructure data. What we're doing on our end is then pulling the current data because we have a lot more information now since a lot of jurisdictions, most of your jurisdictions have submitted your what's called a damage inventory to FEMA. So looking for that information, but then also looking at FHWA ER. 72 million is the cost share, I think, of one of the bridges, let alone everything else that is going on. So looking at the overall need, pulling the information from the projects that you're submitting here, pulling from the data that we collected through the town halls and collected through the surveys, as well as other surveys and data that are available through the county, mitigation planning. So we're pulling together a lot more data in addition to what HUD had at the time that they did their calculation. You want to add anything?
Well, let me follow up with a question, and we're all submitting projects. I don't know how many, soon there will end up being a few hundred. So are the branches then going to go through the process of assigning a weighting, or how are they going to be responsible for prioritizing which projects are pushed forward, or how does that work?
So for this, the information that was collected from here is going towards that assessment. Which projects are actually selected to be funded by CDBGDR will be through the process that Jeannie mentioned earlier with the notice of funding opportunities and that formal process that the county puts forward in the coming months.
And just to add to that, the criteria and ranking, scoring, if you will, are going to be roughly outlined in the action plan. And so that will be part of the action plan that gets submitted. So that'll be a public information. And then once the NOFAs do go out, that ranking and scoring criteria are part of those NOFAs.
And we didn't want to limit the branches to just thinking CDBGDR. Again, 1.1 billion is not going to meet all the limits. We wanted to make sure that they're looking at what is the holistic need, not just due to one funding stream. So we're going to be going over the priorities that they have outlined, the public comments that we have received through the town hall process, and then they'll be identifying projects. We're also going to share the projects that you have identified through the form and with the branches that are applicable to the different types of projects. And they're going to develop initiatives / projects to put forward into the recovery and resilience plan. And then we'll be looking at all funding streams and to assign to those projects where CDBGDR will be one of many different funding streams that are highlighted.
Chris, I mean, your comment is one that's a good comment. So really what we want to do is put together this list. The legislator has asked for a capital improvement project for the next 5 years. Senator Pasadoma and Senator Albritton are coming down the end of June, and the initial survey 9 months later to see what we look like and obviously do that. So I think what we're trying to do through the branches is identify what we need as a whole, and then obviously match them up, give the list, see what we can get from the state, and then look through the 26 different entities in the federal government to see what opportunities we may have. So that's really the needs for the branch. We just try to look at that in a holistic way.
Just to follow up on that, thanks, Commissioner. I was going to touch on that as well, as we realize this is one funding opportunity, but for all of our unmet needs, we're going to be looking at multiple funding opportunities. Is it going to be possible for the task force itself to get that master list so we can have access to take a look at that as well as we're coordinating? Because individually, all our municipalities are going to be working on our own as well as together for this recovery. So that would be very helpful.
Definitely. We'll share once we have the complete list.
Thank you. Thank you.
Which actually leads to the next topic on the agenda perfectly. Mayor Gunter.
Terry's getting a workout.
Get his steps in.
Thank you. I think it's worth mentioning as well with the unmet needs that we have throughout the county, that also I think what we're trying to do is establish that the $1.1 billion isn't going to meet all of our needs. And I think the reason that we're getting this data and putting dollar amounts to that, and I understand that we only have that 120-day window to do that, we have to make the argument that the $1.1 billion isn't enough. And I think that if you look on the other 7 times that the CDBG DR funding has been allocated throughout the nation, that they've always went back and they've increased that dollar amount. So I think it's very important for us to do our homework to maybe put those dollar amounts. I'd prefer to be a little on the higher side than the lower side, so we can make that argument as a task force when we go back to the federal government and say, look, this $1.1 just isn't going to be enough. So I just thought that was worth mentioning.
Perfect. Yeah, with a number of times that CDBGDR has been implemented, and HUD set the stage in stating that they didn't have the data for infrastructure when they did the calculation. So going back and saying, here you go, this is the data, this is what we need, and making that argument through multiple means that additional funding is needed. So with the town halls being over, the stickies have given up and holding up the posters. But just 2 examples of funding streams that we want to make you available. And we'll send you some descriptions of these grant programs that are currently available as part of emergent needs, of making you all aware that recently the U.S. Department of Transportation, Federal Highways Administration has announced a grant program that they have funding available. The deadline for the grant program, it's going to be nationally competitive, is specifically for aiming to reduce damage and disruption to transportation systems. So I know a significant number of the projects that have been submitted or been discussed, that there is this funding program through the Infrastructure and Jobs Act that is currently open, and applications need to be submitted by August 18th. This is, again, like I said, a nationally competitive program. There will be a second iteration of this. They will repeat this grant program next year. This is the first time that this has been since it was created by the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. But definitely a program that we will be looking for in the projects when we do an assessment and making recommendations directly to you all if one of your projects seem to be very competitive with this grant program, since it's currently actively open. And we'll send you ask the staff to put together a 1-pager, it's like 7 pages, but some information pertaining to that grant program. That is not Hurricane Ian specific, since it is nationally competitive. The next grant program, the Economic Development Administration has announced a grant program. This is Ian specific, as well as the other disasters that were declared in 2022. So in 2021. So this is a disaster specific grant program from the Economic Development Agency. It is looking for economic development, but it also can be utilized for infrastructure projects as well. It is not just limited to, it can be for training programs and things along those lines, but then also infrastructure that goes towards economic development and things along those lines. So if there's any projects that you have submitted on Friday, we will be reaching out and saying this may be a good project to submit to the Economic Development Administration. And those grant applications would need to come from your individual jurisdictions. There is always more competitiveness if this is something that is collaborative across jurisdictions for these types of grants. For the EDA grant, there is no submission deadline. They're accepting applications on a rolling basis. So it will be until the funding has been utilized. So for the disasters that were declared in 2021 and 2022, we're looking at the Kentucky floodings, there's fires in California, Hurricane Fiona in Puerto Rico, and other storms that were in 2021. So, and Hurricane Nicole as well. So if there's any questions about these 2 grants, please feel free to reach out to the Resiliently email, but we will be reaching out back to you all if we see if one of your projects seem to be very competitive for one of those grants based off of the information that we have within the project form. And also we'll send out I think it's a 3-pager on that one. Any questions? jump into the engagement update?
Tanya, one question real quick before you go on. So if we have some multi-jurisdictional project, like a county road in the town jurisdiction, or property, an area where it has some county and some town and some private ownership, who submits that?
That'd be part of the discussion of who would be the most appropriate agency or entity to submit it. So for example, we submitted a grant project on behalf of Panama City Beach, but it was in collaboration with Bay County. The road started off in Panama City Beach and then it ends in Bay County. Panama City Beach said that we can do the grant application and lead this, and then received a letter of support from Bay County. So it can be a discussion of who would be the most competitive entity in submitting the grant application.
Thanks.
Okay. As we mentioned at the top of the meeting, we completed the round of 17 town hall meetings, and there's an ongoing active portal for an online survey. These are the results to date. Very gratifying. Over 4,000 people have responded and completed the surveys. This is a breakdown by jurisdiction. I know Councilman Beach, you were concerned about the level of activity. Fort Myers Beach has performed very well in this, and I encourage you to continue to have residents in your jurisdictions to participate and add their voices and information to this.
So with that, the survey priorities of those who had responded, the number one priority that was provided by the online survey respondents was for housing. That is the across the board, the issue that is the most concerning for the community. Second being economic development and environmental issues. And we're going to be emailing you a full, longer report that breaks down by demographics, income, and things along, and then by community as well, municipality, unincorporated Lee County. So you can see how that information changes. But I was reviewing it last night, and housing was the top issue across the board.
So this is a summary of the town halls, their locations. We ended on a very strong note, had over 300 people show up on Wednesday night at Dunbar. It was a great turnout and great participation for a community that did not have the storm surge impacts, but definitely had substantial wind damage and other issues to contend with there. So learned a lot from that. And a number of representatives from that meeting are here today, and very glad to welcome you to the Recovery Task Force meeting. So over 1,000 participants across the county, and there's been great media coverage of these town halls as well.
So on our left was our town hall in Pine Island, and then on our right is in Sanibel. And thank you for those that for everyone that came to the town halls. We always had great discussions and with the community, and a lot of passionate folks about where they want to see their community go. And just to reiterate with Terry, we have some folks in here that actually have been to multiple town halls, including the Dunbar meeting. So thank you all for coming.
And want to thank Chairman Persons for making the schools available. We visited a number of your schools. It was a great tour of the school district, and that was very helpful. At every site, your staff performed admirably, were very supportive, service-oriented, and were able to deliver high-quality programs because of you and your staff.
And thank you all for your public information and external affairs staff that have been partnering with the team and getting information out. Greatly appreciate that as well. With that, we have aggregated a lot of the data that has been provided in the town halls and in the surveys and comparing it to the priorities that the branches have been discussing to date. So at this point, we're going to be going through each branch's priorities and then looking at what is some of the points of what are the specific data points that folks have provided through the post-its. We're still aggregating a lot of the Slido data, since we had such a significant, we had the largest group on Wednesday. So we can speak about that anecdotally a little bit on some of the topics, but we're going to be working through these priorities and looking to you all on, are we good with these priorities for the branches to move forward with? They're going to use these priorities to guide what initiatives they want to start developing and putting forward into their plans to present to you all. So we're looking to validate this is what we're moving forward with, and are there any caveats that we want to add to it based off of the information that we've received from the public through this process?
So the first one with planning and capacity, here's where it really showed up the focus of the short-term recovery response, the immediate planning here. And one of the common themes from the public, the number counts are kind of times they're mentioned, but it's bigger than this when we look at the data coming from the Slido online surveys as well. But the issue of public communication, the old adage that, well, you can't communicate enough, you can't over communicate, as we prepare for a new hurricane season, to think about what are our mechanisms in place to make sure that we have comprehensive and extensive communications. The issue of intergovernmental coordination, people see the imperative of that. And so what's being done ongoing across jurisdictions to help with that coordination, building on the lessons learned. And then the planning communities will go into this more in depth, but identifying in concert with the CDBG DR focus with the low moderate income communities in those areas that were hardest hit by the storm itself. There was an interesting concern raised then about the impact as investments are flowing into certain communities. Does that create an unintended consequence of gentrification in those communities to then further displace residents? And what are provisions that could be made to address that issue?
Yes.
One of the things that.
Could we pass the mic around a little bit?
I was at a chamber meeting in Bonita Springs yesterday, and one of the things that they talked about was that there is an expected 30% increase in population in the region to bring the regional population up to over 2 million people by 2030. And one concern I have is if you take a look at what the resiliency projects will be, what the goals are, but at the same time, you have this influx of people coming in, taking up land, taking up road structures and so forth. In terms of planning and capacity, are we considering the growth in the population for the region that's being forecasted between now and 2030? I mean, 30% increase is a tremendous increase in population.
So in looking to incorporate the idea of growth and making sure that we're accounting for that growth within, we could create a fourth priority, or as you see wanting it to make it a sub-priority within one of those three?
We could set forth some affordable or workplace housing programs.
Okay.
But if we get a 30% increase in the population moving down, let's say from the north, how much land is actually going to be available when we start working on increasing the amount of affordable or workplace housing with that increase in population? So are we trying to take that into account with our planning process?
Got it. So why don't we, if everyone is amenable to this, in the language for the second priority, increase intergovernmental coordination for long-term planning for resiliency, adding in to the end of that sentence, factoring in growth. Okay. With communication, just emphasizing that it was in almost every town hall that communication planning was a concern, an area that they saw an area for improvement needed. Is that something you would like to have specifically outlined in the priorities, or do you feel like the priorities are covering that sufficiently?
I think it needs to be included in the priorities and interagency and the municipality, which we draw, but I know that's come up as a topic in many. Oh, I apologize. Yes, to put that communication as a priority.
So if there's no objections, including that as a specific factor into the plan for improved short-term recovery response, especially with regards to communication pre, during, and post-disaster.
And I assume that would
Sorry, guys.
I assume that includes the thing we've been talking about with hardening communications so that we can have communications that actually work after a disaster instead of
Definitely.
silence.
All right. Other than that, any other additions or modifications to the branch priorities for planning and capacity? All right.
Just to raise my hand. I just keep it here. This is pretty fluid and ongoing because what we've just established is a sub-working group. So we're having different members of our community and also branch members kind of come to the table to give input on a monthly basis at least. So just want to make sure that these are going to be an ongoing, able to make additions and changes as we're just kind of getting really rolling and a greater understanding right now of the direction we're going in. So the better input that we can have out of every branch.
Definitely, we will continue to incorporate feedback. It's just, this is providing the branches direction and saying, all right, go forth and do good things in terms of with the initiatives that they're developing is within the vision that you all have. So definitely incorporating information as we go, but kind of giving them what is the vision to march forward with the initiatives, which we'll be talking about in the next section.
Understood. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Sorry. I know like the school board, we have to because of all the hurricane shelters, communication, that's so important during, and then obviously afterwards. One of our asks, just for the public to know, is to harden possibly our own command center at the district. So we're not crowding in, even though we're communicating, but especially for the afterward part because we have to bring in all our transportation, everything like that. So those are the kind of projects I think under communication.
Excellent. All right, looking at economic recovery, the 3 branch priorities received the feedback. The largest was the second one that identifies short-term actions to support the rapid recovery of businesses, including the access to financing and marketing for tourism-based economy. But looking at the community feedback, the concern with regards to gentrification and needs for affordable housing and transportation was further emphasized. The low interest or other types of assistance for small businesses was also emphasized, and then diversification of industry and training was also emphasized as well. Pertaining to fisheries, this was largely of the 43, I believe it was 42 of the individuals were from the Pine Island Town Hall. So there was a very unified message coming from the Pine Island Town Hall with regards to the fisheries pertaining to looking at within that industry on how assistance can be provided through these efforts. With that, are there any edits that you would like to be made to the branch priorities in light of this information, or do you feel that they are inclusive of the topics that the community has identified? Councilman Beach.
This is kind of a bit of an overlap because, your planning and capacity branch kind of can
Goes
be
across
looked
the
at being,
board.
right,
Yeah.
everything. And I'm looking at things that you have here in some of the priorities. One thing for us is that we have a lot of, we're in the middle of redoing our comp plan. We use more bandwidth in trying to help the property owners of commercial properties that have been destroyed to come up with a plan to let them build back in a way that they couldn't before, but is still compatible with the town. This is like we talked about before, like lean urbanism, or just coming up some mixed use kind of code that we could implement to help people get moving. Because right now there's a lot of properties for sale and they're not moving because people don't know what they can do.
Great point. I think resiliency needs to be the top of the item. I think you have a lot of flexibility within your own cities when it comes to land development code, specifically as it comes to, if you want to have workforce housing, there's provisions in most that allow density become more intense. I think we really need to look at, what effects took place, what type of storm surge you had. We all measure base flood differently. We all measure height differently. So you have the flexibility within your city to follow your own guidelines. And if you need any assistance where we cross over, feel free to contact us and we'll certainly give you our points of view on what we're doing. But we're looking at our land development code from the unincorporated areas and asked staff months ago to do that, to look at that, to address those specific issues that you're going to come across. I do believe there's an awful lot of people in the community, where they don't know what to do. So we're looking at some anecdotal information and we might come to a conclusion, which may not necessarily be an accurate one, because there's a lot of ambiguity out there and a lot of concern on what you can and can't do. But each city has their own flexibility. You're all incorporated. You all have your own city charter, your land development code. It's within your purview to do what you think is appropriate.
And I agree. Of course, we want our independence, but it's also, I'd say no man is an island, but certainly Sanibel and Fort Myers Beach is. But it'd be good to just know what other municipalities are doing. So we're not necessarily doing something that is disconnected from everybody else, that we're all on the same page of the same issue. So it seems there's some coordination and planning, I think would be useful for RTEM.
I agree. So the whole, everybody acting as one team, that's what we get to benefit from. We get to benefit that we can share the different things we've accomplished. Councilwoman Smith talked about a individual group within their city. There's many cities here that started that a month ago. We at the county started months ago and started to have the communication within to try to do that. When we have that information, we will export it to you as quickly as we can. Just because, again, we need to come back as a whole. And I've said that from day one. We're not good, fractured. We are only good as one united Lee County. And that's what I've always advocated.
Thanks.
And Bill, if I could speak to that as well, I know after our last meeting, I did forward to the task force information team, like our density ordinance. So hopefully that was distributed to everybody to show for workforce housing, we allow density increases. So whatever information that we get, we've been working on our zoning in place. We've been doing different ordinances to try to help give relief to anyone that's been impacted. And we also have to be very cognizant of what the state legislature has brought in under Senate Bill 250, that we need to make sure that basically it's giving more relief and not being more restrictive as people try to recover. So an understanding of that bill is going to be really important for the municipalities as they are looking at making changes, how they can, and as importantly, how they can't for at least the next year. I'll forward our ordinances to you.
So with that, are there, based off of this discussion, is there any edits to the branch priorities or for the economic recovery? It sounds like maybe this would be more in housing or in planning capacity. But I just wanted to check in with you all if there's any edits needed to these branch priorities based off of this discussion or the information from the community. Hearing none. All right.
Okay, for education and workforce, they're looking at increasing the skilled and credentialed workers, leveraging partnerships, and improving the outcomes, extending from early childhood education through career, creating the systems for lifelong learning, and to look at all of the intersecting variables here, the housing, transportation, mental health, childcare. The good news is that a lot of these map onto the playbook of Future Makers Coalition, and a lot of this is underway. And so there is a capacity and the pre-existing partnerships to be able to continue to implement this work. Anything come to mind that isn't on this list that you think will be vital for this work?
One thing that comes to mind is, you know, we talk about workforce housing, but you got to look at the workforce as well. Technical training, I think, is very important for our community. We have a lot of, you know, electricians, plumbers, those types of jobs throughout our community. We've already mentioned we're one of the fastest growing areas in the state. So we know housing is going to be a priority for our region. So some type of, you know, buy-in to some technical education for individuals in our community, I think would be advantageous as well.
Good. Would you like that made a little more explicit on that first one about the skill and credential work, including or especially technical?
Yes, that's where I think it should be.
And I think they have that micro accreditation that's going through all through our colleges. I mean, through the Horizon Foundation and the Horizon Council. We've been having panel discussions for that, and all of the universities and schools have been working in collaboration to get that micro accreditation moving forward.
I would also just kind of comment along the same lines that right now, with the need for construction trades, and I understand the national building, you know, new starts for houses is really dropping off. We have a need, but one of the big restrictions is finding housing for those workers to come in. So maybe a short-term idea would be to come up with a temporary housing, not necessarily for displaced people, but for workers to help us rebuild.
Great. So we can emphasize that on the fourth point there of the outside housing, including housing for workers.
I'd also like to mention that the chamber yesterday said that our unemployment rate was 2.3%, a full percentage point less than the national unemployment rate. What I would like to suggest is that Southwest Florida, this region, become known as a place where young people can come to find the training that they need to become electricians and plumbers and construction workers and technical people, so that we see ourselves as a draw for those younger people that we need in our community to take the community forward for the next 30, 40 years. So that that once that these businesses that were destroyed by Ian come back online, that hopefully they can find employees, that we can set ourselves up to be known as a place where young people can come, find housing, find the skills that they need, so that our businesses that do recover can find employees once they reopen.
I think all of this is welcome news for Dr. Martin, who leads the education branch, Tesla Sage, who's the facilitator for that branch and also directs Future Makers Coalition. And you know, they've received that $23 million EDA grant to build out additional workforce credentials for different sectors. This adds to it the construction sector as well. So it's great ideas.
To incorporate Councilman Corey's comments into the priorities. So we have the edit to priority 1 saying improve workforce participation by increasing skilled and credentialed workers to fill jobs in Lee County with an emphasis of technical certifications, but also to draw more participation from younger generations to draw them to Lee County.
Be known in Chicago as a place where young people can come down, find a good job, get the training they need, they'll have a decent place to live.
Okay, excellent. Any additional modifications or comments on those edits to priority one?
I'm just gonna say, when we're doing the education, learn here, live here, stay here. You know, we want to encourage our workforce to remain in Lee County, and I think that's. We want to encourage our workforce to remain in Lee County. So I know that's an initiative that we've been working on through the Horizon Council, is saying, how can we get people that are educated to stay here? And, you know, all of the housing and everything comes along with it. But I think that's an important point that we want to look at.
Tanya,
Yes, sir.
I know the school system has 2 technical colleges. Our long-range plan has one in the East Zone, which I think is desperately needed. And all our high schools also, you know, offer certifications in different ones there. So expanding that is definitely something that I assume it's in there somewhere, is how we want to expand it, but that would include that. So, all right. Just want to make sure.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. Any other additions or edits to the education workforce? Thank you all. So for health and social services, we received in the dots, the votes towards these branch priorities, with the number 1 priority being access through mobile services for special needs environments, including necessary services and accessibility to facilities built to provide services, pharmacies, and mental health services. Was the priority that was the most popular. We did not receive as much community feedback, particularly towards that branch. But are there any edits that you all are seeing into these branch priorities based off of your own experiences in your jurisdictions? Yes, sir.
The only thing that that's sort of glaring omission up there is workforce. You talk about workforce retention, and we've talked about workforce at other parts during this meeting, but you know, we are short, you know, orders of magnitude 300 doctors in the county. We have you know, nurse practitioner and PA issues. We have nurse issues, and you know, as you think about the growth that Chris talked about, if we don't solve those problems, you know, access will be hampered, and that's going to create you know, in terms of building out in the future, some real issues. People moving here expect the healthcare that exists today, if not more.
With that, do you see any edits to these branch priorities? I think maybe that would be in the housing, upcoming housing, or highlighting within the technical, educational, that may be a certification needed.
There's both housing and education dimensions there, and some of it, Armor, goes back to, you know, what you're doing in the school district. And we're trying to get, you know, high school kids interested in careers in healthcare. It's almost a parallel to the trades. But you know, if we don't grow those, it goes back to, you think about older people and how you keep them at home, what's required. And it's all part of the same. We talked about the micro-credential programs. It's all part of the same. So I don't know. I have to leave it to your judgment as to whether it fits under community priorities or branch priorities. But you know, it's a big deal.
Definitely. Councilman Veach?
I would just add, kind of in my experience with the constituency, is there's a lot of people who are suffering mentally through this process, but they don't either know to ask or don't know where to ask. So maybe communication about and coordination about what is available for the people.
So looking at branch priority 3, mental health response in real time, especially through the 1-year anniversary, with support staff and considerations for workforce retention and well-being, including communication strategies.
Yeah, maybe an outreach.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would put an exclamation point behind what Councilman Veach had said. You know, and again, going back to the, you know, workforce question, you know, there's significant shortages in psychiatry and psychology, behavioral health social work, not medical social work, but psychiatric social work. We grow our own a lot. FGCU does a great job, but there's a lot of access issues. We are currently involved with the community health needs assessment. That data is being drawn today. It should be ready in the fall. We've looking backwards over the last 3-4 community health needs assessments that have been done. This always shows up as the number one issue. And so I would, whether it's outreach or longitudinal case management or crisis intervention, okay, there is a huge priority there. And how that shows up, it shows up in everywhere. I mean, it shows up in incarceration, public safety. It shows up in physical medicine being more difficult to treat, which is more costly. So I would echo what you said, Councilman.
Okay, so we'll add that to the third priority in terms of highlighting the need to get the word out, to do outreach and communications to the public on existing resources and ensuring that there has that visibility for folks that are needing assistance, that they know where to reach out to, or for folks to reach out on behalf of a loved one.
Tanya,
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure where this would go, but we do have a great need for special needs shelters during the hurricane. I mean, shelters, but yes, I don't know, probably not there. But
Thank you for
under
leading us to our next slide.
infrastructure. I knew that.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Tanya. Well, my dad took the words right out of my mouth of what I was going to mention. But I think even broader than special needs shelters is looking at the ways that we can support persons with disabilities throughout disasters and difficult times and thereafter, as well as families who have members or children with disabilities in our community. And I don't know if that falls back under the social services,
Yes.
health and social services.
So going back to health and social services, maybe adding that to the fourth priority, regulatory requirements for special services and supportive living centers and options for providers, but overall support for families with disabilities.
I would say families and persons with disabilities. Thank you.
And we will make the edits that we heard today and send that all out to all of you all for final approval to make sure that we accurately reflected what you had communicated here and any other edits. And then we'll finalize the priorities for the next round of branch meetings. But add that to the fourth priority. Leading to infrastructure.
So we hear a lot of consensus around the critical infrastructure systems of water, power, transportation, communications, our sanitary systems. By far and away, the largest voting for priorities there. Echoing the theme of the pre-disaster planning. For that, here's the other case that focus on shelter needs and special needs shelters shows up, and understanding that the imposition on schools that are trying to reopen for the educational programs, but being enlisted in the service of providing sheltering needs over an extended period of time. So that was heard loud and clear. Building in as a condition of resiliency, the notion of redundancy of systems. And then what has emerged, it doesn't quite express it here, is the value of partnerships across jurisdictions, across providers, that it's to Commissioner Ruane's point about if we remain fragmented, we're not going to be able to recover as well as if we're working together. And so identifying and formalizing the relationships among jurisdictions and among the providers and partners that deliver the essential services. And then there's the interest long-term. I think this goes hand in glove with increasing the population by 30%, or, how do we maintain the livability, the access to natural areas, the amenities that have made this such a impressive place to come and live. For the livability requirements, a lot of interest in the public around the paths, trails, sidewalks, putting those into communities. Reactions, reflections on these things that would be adjusted?
Number one, I mean, obviously we all agree that preserving and hardening critical infrastructure, we are somewhat a unique county where we go through the jurisdictions and have FGOA out in Captiva, we have Island Water in Sanibel, we have Pine Island Water. So there's so much we can harden, but our partners, whether it's water, whether it's electric, whether it's communications, we rely on others, and we are hampered because others are providing those services. So we can advocate for all we want in hardening, but when we lose communications, it's critical that they restore. So we need to really develop a much greater and deeper relationship with our partners to truly have them as partners. And if anything, we need to reflect back on what took place. Because listen, right now, you go to the legislator and say, I want to harden water. It'd be easy if it was Lee County Utilities. It's more challenging as we have had providers basically servicing areas. I mean, it's a challenge. And when I testified at the legislative delegation, and when I testified in front of up in Tallahassee, I had real concerns of our structure the way we are, because we do have a very unusual servicing providers that if it was Lee County Utilities, it'd be a lot easier to go to legislature and say, we need to harden. But Pine Island Water or Island Water are nonprofits. So my concern to the hardening aspect is there's things that we're going to need some intervention for. I mean, I don't know how you harden such things, like things that are outside our capacity. I think we could advocate for them. I think we could build deeper partnerships. I think we need to stress and look back on what we did and didn't do. But, if for nothing else, I know when, we return, up to Tallahassee, we need to have it removed that we're fragmented, and we need to understand that the constituent is receiving water. And we have that obligation to provide them water. So we need to have it hardened, and it really should be irrelevant who's providing the service. If I want to subcontract out to a company, it really should not matter. We're still providing water to Lee County residents. I mean, that's just a typical example of what I see. So in number one, I don't know how you phrase that.
I don't know whether the community considers healthcare infrastructure, but it's pretty hard to imagine a community without healthcare. And we Lee Health had some issues with fire suppression systems, which caused us to evacuate about 400 patients. And it was the absence of municipal water that caused that, and all sorts of life safety issues as that occurred, moving critically ill patients all over the state. It was done flawlessly. Nobody was hurt. That speaks to the quality of leadership and medical care that's being provided. But we desperately need a better answer on the fire suppression system. And I don't know if healthcare should be added under the first branch priority. I think that would be a good thing. One other item that we bumped into, maybe it's under communications, but when the cell towers go down, we need Plan B. And Starlink, worked very, very well. And having a ready access to that type of programming, so as you're moving ambulances around or whatever you're doing, you have that ability moving staff around. Transportation, we had everything from doctors to aides, lose their cars. We lost 1,100 cars, and that's the way they get to work. And they had issues with replacing those cars and still making car payments. And so I don't know how you fix that, but these are things, as you talk about resiliency and you talk about recovery, that if not there, we're going to have problems.
David, I mean, just to add on to your point, so when I had the opportunity to testify up at the legislature, I talked specifically about being at the EOC and having the mental strain of knowing we had to evacuate people from the hospitals. And again, go back to some of the critical things that we need to change. We need to change that because we can't have that happen again. Because to your point was exactly, I used the example of being at the EOC and having to make those tough decisions and then coordinating with our first responders to do that in a flawless way while I'm having literally life in my hand. The pressure was, off the charts.
We had some staff that was there 8 days straight.
I also think when we're looking for infrastructure, it could be short-term infrastructure needs that we have, housing after the event and trying to get the FEMA trailers, the state trailers, because we had people that were homeless immediately. And if there was any way that we could pre-position, have locations. I mean, that was a big deal as we're trying to learn on the fly where these locations could be, how we can get water and electric to them. And also, when we look at our, pre-positioning on mail, how that will work, and just, these are things before, during, and after. It might not be long-term infrastructure, but it's very definite short-term infrastructure needs that we may have again and need to be better prepared for than we were. That's a big lesson learned.
Yes, sir. One more time. Now you're on.
Thank you. I'll just give a quick example on what's happened in Bonita Springs. Bonita Springs was incorporated as a city in 2000. But prior to that, in the early to mid 80s, Bonita Springs had a population of 8,000. And Bonita Bay, which ultimately became a community of 3,800 homes, was trying to be built. So it needed water, needed sewer. So what happened was Bonita Springs Utilities came along and constructed the facilities needed to support Bonita Bay. As Bonita Springs continued to grow and as it became a city, it entered into an agreement where Bonita Springs Utilities became our supplier. And it functions pretty much as a franchise. We never really go through the process of a hard judgment about how good of a job they're doing, but we're satisfied they're doing a good job. And as a result, there's a private-public partnership that's in place. And it was interesting in talking to BSU over the last couple of weeks. They have submitted projects in for the hardening of their critical infrastructure, septic to sewer conversion. So I'm just suggesting that for the other cities, maybe there's a closer relationship that you had historically. You might want to just revisit and sit down with those folks and see that their priorities are matching what you're trying to do. So worked for us. I don't know if you're in the same situation, but you may want to look at it.
So hearing the different comments being made and the edit to branch priority 1, adding medical facilities to critical infrastructure in the examples that are listed here, identifying the holistic approach in terms of in recognition that a lot of the infrastructure are owned by non-governmental entities, cooperative entities, and the private sector. So in reflection that it has to be a holistic approach, recognizing those multiple stakeholders, but then also redundant systems of having hardening communications, hardening water infrastructure, but anticipating the I was about to make up a word, and trying to have those backup systems, looking at redundant systems as an option within priority one. I do, for Holly, Councilwoman Smith's position with regards to housing, that is something we definitely heard in a lot of town halls in terms of planning for immediately post-storm. I do want to give, I was actually in the EOC with Jeannie and Mickey. They came to the table with sites in October. But having that coordination and pre-recognition with the state and FEMA and getting them on board, maybe potentially well, it's worked out at this point, but we're in the process, but looking for future storms. So looking as we come to housing, made that note. But for priority one, any other edits other than medical facilities, redundant systems, and holistic approach?
Chief.
Oh, Chief.
I think mine was just more of a question. What are we doing to incorporate the relationships with all of these different partners throughout the municipalities and the unincorporated areas of Lee County? Specifically, I was reading through the minutes from the last meeting. Unfortunately, I was not able to be there, and there was a discussion about a specific meeting and getting Lee County Electric Co-op and FP&L together to have discussions throughout the infrastructure branch. Have those happen. I didn't see the date specific to that, and I was just curious if all of these different relationships and partners are being incorporated into these branches.
So that's actually the next item on the agenda of talking about the workshops.
So one thing that I see as maybe belonging in this is maybe an evaluation of where the bottlenecks are for evacuation routes. Just on now you mentioned that there's Department of Transportation grant, that maybe that's something that
That is an
be-
eligible activity.
yeah, that we could use, maybe leverage some of that, because there are a lot of places where it seems that we could be better at getting people off that want to leave.
So incorporating that into priority two. So looking at bottlenecks for evacuation. Okay.
Sure.
And something I wanted to mention that that I know we incorporated in our unmet needs, and it's a follow-up to David's comments. One of the things in the very beginning after the storm was a priority for our city is to keep Cape Coral Hospital open. A lot of other hospitals we know in Fort Myers were closing, and one of the concerns that the hospital had was the water supply that you had mentioned. And we actually had, our Public Works Department working around the clock. And I think the hospital gave us a deadline of 4 p.m. on a specific day. I can't remember which day it was after the storm. And we had our staff working around the clock in order to get that water supply reconnected. And I think we got it completed at about 3:50. So, and because you had told us that we had to shut the hospital down for safety concerns. So in our unmet needs, we put that as a priority to have a direct water line from our RO plant directly to the hospital, because we know how important that is. So when you're looking at infrastructure needs, I think the first thing that we have to do is identify early on, what do we want to make sure is still up and running? That's our public safety facilities, that's our hospitals, and it's not only water, but it's electricity as well. And also, I know we have an emergency operations center and a local agreement with the county, and we work together in these types of events. But that's something else as well. We have to make sure we look at those two structures and make sure they're hardened and they have exactly what they need as well. So I just wanted to reiterate, what you said.
Tanya, I'd like to follow up on Mayor Gunter and Member Klein's remarks and propose perhaps a separate branch priority that focuses on hardening critical facilities. Under the first, we're talking about critical infrastructure overall, but we also have had past grant programs in the state focused on critical facilities such as hospitals, wastewater facilities, potable water facilities, fire departments, police departments, the EOCs, emergency shelters. But the branch could dive into and come up with our own list of what are those critical facilities that we should be focusing on hardening and that are the first line of defense in our community.
So, great points. What we're trying to do, and I think we did early, is identify specific areas where we have some of the critical needs and identified those. And water was, certainly the first one. And again, trying to explain to the legislator how we're set up. And I can certainly potentially get some funding for the county utilities, but I can't for Pine Island. So, those are some of the issues, but you go through major points that have come up, and we said 3: debris, electric, and water. Okay. Electric, we're having ongoing conversations with both LCEC and FP&L and at all the town halls. I wasn't trying to pick on anybody, but it was identifying that I've been here almost 20 years and we've grown from a population of X to Y. And certain companies just had better resources, whether that was people, whether that was, obviously supplies here to be able to respond. And we need to have not only conversations with the branch, but we need to separate what I would say are essential things that we require here. Hospitals being one, water being another, electric being another. There's like the first 5 items we need to come up with. Those are the immediacy. And communications. I mean, if we haven't ordered a couple thousand Starlinks, then we're behind. Just simple things like that we're trying to have in your regards, critical, but like super critical.
So hearing the feedback of creating an additional priority differentiating between like civil infrastructure and specific facilities, of identifying which are the critical facilities that needing to identify how they can be hardened and redundant systems being created to ensure that they are operational post-disasters. That in addition to the medical facilities being identified specifically within the priorities and the holistic approach due to how many stakeholders own the infrastructure, and then the redundant systems, emphasizing that point. Any other edits to these priorities? Hearing none. Housing.
Okay. For this, this is, as the survey noted, this is the area of highest need. So looking at the regulatory environment to reduce the cost of housing, codes and permitting, zoning changes to increase density and redevelopment, and then looking at the incentives, particularly for housing for vulnerable populations and communities here. Looking at the offsets for the cost to make some of these changes to increase resiliency. How does that happen for the senior citizen living on fixed income or for individuals in low to moderate income communities? Creating that balance with the character of traditional neighborhoods and those neighborhoods that would be attractive for this influx of young population, the workforce for today and the future. Helping seniors stay in place, addressing the challenges with the process of federal government, and then the broadly need for greater affordability of housing. So reactions to this, additions, things that are not covered here, things you want to emphasize?
I was wondering about is this where like the development of workforce housing would belong?
Yes.
It is indeed. And the branch and other conversations, the terms are used variably: workforce housing, attainable housing, affordable housing. They all have different meanings. One of the priorities of the branch will have to be to provide clarity and definitions for what those mean, as there are different types of housing, different types of communities. But that's included here.
I have a question. Could you help me understand what deregulation to reduce costs means?
Yeah, with the housing branch has a number of people who are in the construction trades, housing development. And when they identify the layers of permitting costs, fees, and all that that are required for even pre-construction to get going, that it adds in their calculation a substantial amount to the cost to build.
Just looking back at my notes in terms of comments that you've all previously made with regards to housing for individuals that are helping in the recovery, for the workers that are actually doing the construction, as well as pre-disaster planning in terms of housing options in the future. Is there any other kind of edits that you'd like to see, or in additions to these branch priorities based off of what you're seeing in your jurisdictions and through your own participation through the town halls? Yes, sir.
This is not my area of expertise, just talking as a citizen. But my sense is that insurance is a significant issue, and I'm surprised it's not up there, both claims processing and the availability.
Your insurance came a lot up in discussions in the town halls, definitely. Would you like to add that as a priority here?
Again, I'm repeating myself, but
Mhm.
but claims processing, people find out what they need, whether it's a roof or windows or whatever they need, and then they wait months, and they don't have the working capital, the reserves, and that gets in the way of getting back into their homes. And then secondly, why they're not back in their homes, the mental health issues that you talked about, Councilman Veach, they get worse and worse because you're putting 12 people in a house built for 6, that type of situation. And so that's the first piece. Second piece is just the availability of coverage. We're down to just citizens at this point, and I don't know what we do about that, but it's a material issue that people can't get back in their homes because they can't get the insurance as well.
And I would agree with Mr. Klein. One of the number one complaints I get from people is insurance. We're mentioning FEMA and the SBA. The other branches are insurance and banks, people who hold mortgages and how they're handled. And I know we had some insurance open houses, and they were very effective by just getting the insurance companies at a desk with the oversight of our insurance regulators, and a lot of people who were not making any progress, they walked in with a problem, walked out with a check. So those kind of things are very effective, I think, and it'd be good to have something in place for the next time that this can happen a little more efficiently.
With proper outreach, because I found some of those, we didn't find out about it until almost when it was happening.
Yeah.
So and it was only in a couple of specific places, and I think it needs to be expanded.
I mean, I agree with all 3 points. I mean, I think we have an issue, we've been advocating to try to get SBA to the table to have SBA providers augment the additional workforce they have to actually process claims quicker. There's a system in place where if you apply for an SBA, there are providers that actually do that, not SBA. So we're asking SBA to allow the system that they built to lend billions and trillions of dollars through the SBA portal to use the providers that are set up. That'll expedite claims. We're also all advocating for the disaster loss designation for tax returns and making sure that comes through in those regards. I mean, so, we're trying to look through the branches, but in the same token, trying to make sure we have those types of conversations, because, someone that's been in this field for a long time, there's a solution here that is right in front of everyone's face to just let the providers come in, to your point. But the other issue that's looming that's going to really smack us in the next 3 to 6 months is insurance renewals on what we do. I know of many people that have reached out to me to said their premium was $10,000, their premium is now $50,000. What can we do? And again, this is a state issue. a federal issue, because we're going to need to come up with a solution to have it attractive. I mean, we were just at a town hall type of environment or a speaking environment where Senator Scott continued to advocate that flood shouldn't go up at all because we've been a donor state for so long. Wind is just another element, and it's really how we put it together. But that's going to be another critical issue that's going to come up. And we're going to realize just how severe it is in the next 3 to 6 months as those renewals start to come in, because unfortunately, that's the way they're set up. Really, June to December is a period where no one's going to want to open their mail.
And I think too, that some of these numbers, like what's going to happen with insurance, is that I know a lot of people in my community are on the fence about whether they need to lift, rebuild, or try to work under the 50% rule. And I don't think a lot of people understand that building back low puts them very vulnerable to future insurance increases. And it's hard to, maybe there needs to be an outreach to let people know that equation to what they're really doing when they're rebuilding under the 50% rule.
I'm unsure.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention also that, there's a direct correlation between insurance and affordable or workforce housing. You have a debt to income ratio that, that particular individual has to meet. And I think we would all be naive sitting around this table, didn't realize what the commissioner said, that the rates are going to go through the roof. So just that in itself could hamper an individual from qualifying for that particular loan. So we can have all the programs in the world for workforce housing, but if we don't address the insurance issue as well, that could definitely be an impediment from someone trying to get a home, no matter what type of programs we put in place.
So hearing the discussion, adding a priority specifically with regards to insurance and twofold, both in the active needs now and dealing with insurance providers and ensuring that they do full payouts on the policies that were existing at the time of Hurricane Ian's landfall, but and helping individuals go through that process, but then also looking forward for the dramatic increases that are anticipated for insurance and maintaining insurance that in the coming year and years, and the barriers that it has to home ownership. Any other edits to the new priority or the priorities that are on the screen?
If I may?
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to go back to the deregulation of to reduce costs of housing. And I think we've got to be very cognizant that every municipality in the county, we have our own codes. We have to follow our own codes. We have our own permitting, what those costs are set by what the needs are. We have gone ahead and have a couple of reductions during this event to reduce those costs to our constituents that are taking permits, doing their permits to revitalize, rebuild, and get their lives back together. But I think we've got to be very careful, because I know that this has come to us over and over again through, our Horizon Council, through businesses. And I don't think there's a clear understanding that there have to be different codes. We're in a coastal high hazard zone, so our codes are significantly different. Our permitting, we all have different permitting software programs, and we get to choose which ones work for us. So I think it's very difficult. Generalized, I think the state has specific laws in place that we all follow, but we lead local. And so we've got to be able to maintain that. And I think we're all doing the best we can under these circumstances, but the deregulation, I'm just not sure that that's an actionable item for us to consider.
I would also, to kind of piggyback on what Holly said, is that we also have constraints. Our constraint is we have 1 2-lane road. So adding more densities creates more traffic, and it's kind of a limiting factor for us. We've taken the approach, and again, this is independent, is that if you have density, you should have workforce housing as a part of that to try to alleviate some of the traffic.
Okay. I don't see anything up there about homelessness. I know we're talking about housing, but specifically, there's well over 2,000 homeless people in this community. Some areas you see them, some areas you don't. But that's a concern that needs to be addressed.
The third bullet we can add.
So within So for highlighting that, addressing housing issues and development incentives for vulnerable populations, communities, we can add a language on that saying, particularly with regards to homeless individuals.
That's fine, you know, understanding that a lot of them are veterans, a lot of them with mental health issues.
All right, Councilwoman Smith, is there any particular edits that you would request for the first priority?
Well, maybe consideration instead of deregulation. And we are also, we're always looking at consistency of codes. Again, I'm not sure there can be a, I'm sorry, not sure that there can be a countywide consistency of codes because every municipality in the county have different code requirements. And especially for us on barrier islands, what our constraints are there. And permitting, I just think, I'm not sure how to reword it, but I would just say maybe, you know, in the event of a disaster, that all municipalities look at best practices to help the relief efforts.
Some of the branch feedback was the uniqueness of Lee County. If I'm a contractor, I come into Lee County from a Henry County, and I'm a general contractor, I have a license, I'm able to do work in Lee County. They go to the various cities and you have a BTR that's required. So it's another cost, and they basically identified those. And I understand, having run a municipality, your point, I think the councilwoman's comments are more than valid, but the comments were, yes, associated with even simple things like the fact that if I'm a contractor, I want to go in Fort Myers Beach or Sanibel or some other areas, I'm paying 2, 3, 4 BTR fees to do work within Lee County, where I come in unincorporated Lee County with a Henry County license. And it's really because I have a state license, a general contractor, we don't charge them another fee. So that's where the differences are. And that came out, you know, why do you do it here? Why don't you do it there? So that's just one fee that came up very frequently. And many people ask me, you know, why we're set that way. And as someone that governed in a small city, I understand the need for that particular BTR, and I understand what it is there for. But it's a cost. And let's understand, if you're a contractor and you haven't done business in Lee County and you're coming from another county, you could potentially be paying 4 or 5 BTR fees. And that's a cost. And the consumer pays for it. It's added on to whoever they're building for. So that was one of the other areas that just came up, and it came up more often than not. And I talked with your prior city manager about that, and he's like, don't forget about the revenue aspect for the city. I get that.
And, you know, I mean, most of those fee revenues have to go towards what the fee is intended for. But the other thing is there's a balancing act between us trying to make it as easy as possible to get the workers in to do the work, which is beneficial to us and the contractor, and trying to protect our people from unscrupulous contractors.
So we all incorporated, you know, to protect the city, and I certainly understand both sides of it. I listen. So, you know, deregulation is probably a strong word. So, you know, consideration is probably a more appropriate word. But understand both points.
Yeah.
I've done now 2 different jobs, so interesting from 2 different pair of lenses.
It's a unique perspective.
All right, hearing from you all, we will add the insurance priority. We will edit the first priority from deregulation to consideration, and then add to priority 3 in recognition of individuals experiencing homelessness, and highlighting that as a vulnerable population that is needing support. Any other edits needed for the housing? Councilwoman Smith? Chief, can you pass it around?
I was looking at the bullet point under community priorities, the improvement to the slow moving. We talked about the SPA, not necessarily just how slow, but also the requirements that are required there. I could go on and on about FEMA and the requirements and the hoops that you have to jump through, not necessarily from Irma, but I'm sorry, with Irma and Ian as well. So I think some better communication and improvement also to the steps into the process and the requirements is what I'm thinking.
So potentially adding to the third bullet of address housing issues and development incentives. Well, forward communication fit best. Potentially is that a third bullet, fourth priority, in addition to the insurance one, of communication related to programs and community education? Is it having that additional priority? Sounds good. All right.
And Tanya, can I get clarification on the zoning changes to comprehensive planning that increase density and redevelopment? Is that restricted to LMI, attainable workforce?
They are looking at a cross-reference of different topics, yes.
So I'm sure people will certainly understand Sanibel is built out. Our density would only increase under attainable housing, below market rate housing. And I know for our municipality, an increased density is not something that we would be able to support. That would have to actually go to referendum for that. So I just want to be careful that I'm staying within my lane for our municipality. And increasing density would not be a factor for us unless it was for below market rate housing. That's the only way in our comprehensive plan. So just wanted to put that on the record for the city of Sanibel.
Understood.
I think, what we're trying to do is see what fits for all of us, but we recognize that each city here has its own regulations, and we're not trying to trump any of those at all. So I can't emphasize that enough. I just want to make sure there's clarity. You incorporated for a particular reason. We're just trying to obviously benefit from the synergies and the collaboration we can do. And nothing that we're going to do is going to be 100% perfect. We're going to edit this more times than we'd like to. And even when it's done, I guarantee we'll have edits.
Just want to state for the record. Thank you.
No problem.
All right, with cultural resources, identify short-term recovery and stabilization, convene the arts, and identify regional cultural planning and representation for the arts. We received community priorities and communications related to those. Are there any edits to these priorities that you would like to see to be presented back to the branches?
Well done.
Hearing none? All right, excellent.
Well done.
And for our last branch, natural resources.
Here we're looking at the various regulatory actions and incentives for natural resources, and then the fundamental direct actions to look at the region's hydrology and ecological conditions, and then a understanding of the need for ongoing public education and awareness campaigns for the relationship of people to the environment. Communities have identified then specifically how they're impacted by these stormwater management programs, things like 10 Mile Canal. Are there transformative projects that can mitigate risk? And then how to build in incentive programs to help residents themselves to be able to reduce impact and restore vegetation. Councilman?
I personally think this is one of the more important priorities. If we're looking at a 30% population growth over the next 7 years, if we can better manage stormwater, whether it's coming from the west because of hurricanes or it's coming from the northeast in the big area that drains into our rivers, if we can better manage that process, we can, and maybe this is where I get shot, but we can reassess the DRGR, because if we're looking for land for affordable or workplace housing, the land east of 75 is going to have to be looked at as a possible source for that land. And I think the municipalities whose boundaries go out into the DRGR really need to assess whether or not there's a responsibility with respect to land ownership. If we want to control how workplace housing is built, if we want to control the cost, one of the key ways that we can do that, I think, is to buy some of the land. And I think the cities need to have a serious conversation about that. And my second point again is I think we need to reassess improvements in stormwater management and our ability to take a portion of the DRGR to build affordable housing.
Just want to add that when we talk about building affordable housing, the further away we get from the work centers, the more traffic we create and the more of the monthly income, while it may not go to housing and now goes to transportation. So it's a trade-off that really doesn't work that well sometimes.
You have to live and work in your community.
I agree with what you're saying, because the idea of the workforce housing is live where you work, and the further away you're living and you're working, it really becomes affordable housing. I'd also point out, I know this is not really, well, it is kind of in our municipality too, is that one issue that seemed to come up in this storm is where do you put these mountains of debris? And I understand that where they were, it's either Stara or Bernina, that land is going to be developed, will no longer be available. And maybe part of this is you can do two things to that. If you acquire land, you could use it as a water quality product. You can use it to hold rainwater when you have that. And then if we have a storm, have open space so you can put debris.
When I look at the definition of a DRGR, it states it's for density reduction and groundwater resource, and I think there's a reason that it's protected.
Well, but there, at some point, you get to a population growth. Population will change priorities. And just because something is protected doesn't mean that it can't be reassessed as in terms of what we actually need. All I'm just saying is consider it. I'm not advocating for it.
So with the branch priorities that we currently have, any edits to these in terms of or in addition to it? Listening to Councilman Veach's points of identifying potentially a priority of mixed use space in terms of environmental protection as well as utilization during disasters.
Say as a possibility, dual use of lands, but you probably have to acquire the land to keep it from being developed and then not being available for debris or water retention.
Okay, would you like to add that as a branch priority or potentially add that to branch priority 1?
Yeah, item number 1 is fine, add it to that.
So this has taken a lot of time of the meeting, but this is the heart of the meeting. This is to provide direction for the branches that will now shift from gathering public information and ideas to begin to start to focus on the set of priorities that you've set forth here. So this was really an important conversation to make sure that each of you had adequate time to review and provide input. We clearly won't be able to continue on through the other materials, but it is a heads up about the workshops that are coming up where we start to engage subject matter experts, deep dive conversations into not the branches themselves, but into a set of clusters of issue topics, the housing, the infrastructure, community resilience, and then the business and workforce. So those are being organized for the first full week of June that we've got those set up. But I just want to contextualize that we spent a lot of time here because this was your conversation. We needed to do that. Tanya?
Yes, so we'll be sending you all, so as part of the workshops that are happening the first week of June, thank you all for, we've reached out to a number of your staff and other subject matter experts from the region as well as outside of the region for best practices that have been identified by the branches elsewhere in the state and in the country to provide input. This is to get to Chief DeLalo's point earlier in terms of bringing those stakeholders to the tables. This will be happening the first week of June. It is available on the Resiliently website as well. You are welcome to attend them all. They are public meetings. Minutes will be taken and therefore enabling the discussion between branch members or RTF members with the subject matter experts. So you are welcome to come to those as well, or any of your staff. It will be a public meeting as well. So just for your visibility, these topics, we have identified some initial questions. We will email these to you all. And if you have identified any other questions that need to be asked during those, if you could please provide those next week. And then we will include that into the facilitators agenda. And we're bringing some other additional facilitators to that are subject matters experts in the certain areas to help in those discussions. Yes.
On that, could you please send out to the task force members? We have the dates, just who is going to be the subject matter experts. I know I received an email, but I didn't know about this date prior, so I might have to say, okay, I can't do it because we've got TDC and on that date. On that, and then also with the branches. Thank you. You sent me the visibility sheet for one of the past meetings, but it'd be really great if we could also get to the task force members, maybe the breakdown, that executive summary right following the meeting when you have that ready. So that can help us prepare. That actually helped me understand today's meeting a little bit more, but that would be very helpful for that information to come out. And then I can get it to our council so they can understand where all the branches are headed and where we are as well. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Excellent. And yes, we'll send you, we're in the process of confirming with all the subject matter experts, and it was confirming with the branches during their last meeting and then who to invite and working with the different jurisdictions. So apologize for the kind of evolving nature of the workshops, but we will get you all the information as we have it right now. All right. From that, the branches just kind of looking into the future, their next meetings, they'll be looking at initiatives and will be provided technical briefs on the different initiatives that they're initially discussing or some of the more popular initiatives that were discussed during the town halls. They will start designing the initiatives that will be incorporated into the branch action plans, which will then be the appendices that are included in the recovery and resilience plans. Snapshot of what it's going to look like in the plan. This will be also another email that we send you all. This is another phase of planning. These are the community plans that are going to be a little bit more of a deep dive into a specific neighborhood, looking at exactly what can the look be. It's a master plan for that individual community at a much deeper look. We did one of these for downtown Panama City. We looked at traffic flow, parking, the facade of businesses, looking at the funding streams available to them. So the planning and capacity branch at their next meeting will be coming up with recommendations to you all in terms of the communities to target that they are recommending. We have criteria that we have proposed. If we are missing any criteria, or if you would like any potential community specifically highlighted, then please send that to the Resiliently email, and we will include that in the next planning and capacity branch discussion. All right. With emergent issues, we're continuing the discussion with the Small Business Administration. We're currently in coordination with the disaster and regional leadership, and they are inquiring to the DC leadership on who would be the best person to come and discuss and in real time be able to problem solve with Lee County and the task force to address the concerns that have been identified thus far. So we're working at it and communicating and poking and They've been responsive, and we're just identifying who is the appropriate official to be able to have that in real-time discussion with the task force. For the permitting dashboard, we're almost there, and we'll be sending that out to you all based off of the request at the last Art Recovery Task Force meeting. So we'll be submitting that to you all in the next week or so with the information that we've been collecting from the different municipalities and from the county with regards to the number of permits that have been requested and the average processing time that has been seen to date since the Hurricane Ian. So we'll have that to you all within the week. And then with regards to the emergent issue that would identify for Salis Care, since then, Salis Care has actually taken great strides in reopening. Significant portions of their operation anticipate to be at pre-disaster capacity within 30 days. So we'll still provide, we discussed potentially putting together a case study from what was done with Bay County, but that was a different scenario after this new development with Salis Care in terms of them being able to be near fully operational. While within Bay County, there was a longer duration of closure.
So we covered the workshops. That'll be followed by a week of branch meetings. There'll be a lot more information back to this body at the end of June. And that leads us now to, if there's any further comment that you want to share before we move to public comment. Okay, then for public comment, gratified by the turnout that we've had today. And in the future, anticipating even more turnout, we will open up both sides of the room for the availability. So anybody who cares to make public comment, we're limited to 3 minutes. Robbie over here will be the timekeeper. He'll raise his hand with 1 minute left for that. So, Lisa will move the microphone around for anybody who cares to make public comment. Just raise your hand.
I will. I probably don't need a microphone.
Yeah, you do, so it's captured on
Okay,
the
great.
audio.
Thank you. Hold off on that time, please. My name is Marcia Ellis, and I'm speaking here today to say that I came to the education workforce meeting on 5/18, and my comment was not included in the slide presented, and I would like it to be. I pointed out that the public is unable to accurately assess their risk to life, safety, and the damage to their insurance at this time. So there is an information and an education gap. There are some platforms that help with that, such as riskfactor.com, that help people better understand the risk to their property. There's education platform through weatherstem.com, which can educate the public about their risk to their life, safety, and property, as well as the community rating system, which when it's robust, helps lower the cost of insurance for the entire community. Also want to point out there's a diversion of the workforce away from the recovery areas when we have so much development going on. And I took a particular offense with the housing poster as it was presented to the public at the Dunbar Town Hall. I see it as a forced choice and a fixed price menu that basically says, public, you can choose between deregulation, changes to the comp plan, or further incentives for developers. It's all about the developers, and it's not about the people and what the people want for housing for their communities. Things like green infrastructure, access to public transport, etc. So we need to backstep and engage the public in what they want for housing going forward, so we don't have a repeat of what's been taking place in Estero. I do agree that the parameters of affordable and workforce housing need to be explained better. Also want to point out that the opportunity to reduce risk for the whole community exists through proper natural resource management, the use of open space, the acquisition of conservation
one
lands that
minute.
reduces the actual physical risk of flooding.
So particularly, I want the housing issue and the poster addressed. Thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you for sharing very clear, concise comments. Gentleman over here.
Hi, thank you all very much. Two questions as far as output and outcomes around workforce housing, what provision can be made. And I think from a community perspective, trying to understand the municipality's standpoint or stance on SB 102, Live Local Act, and how you'll receive that and how you'll respond to it. Candidly, in my opinion, that takes care of a lot of the questions around regulation. If you blanket accept it or you blanket ignore it. My second question or curiosity is what programs you found effective in your municipalities that can be used to leverage with these funds so that we can see more positive outcomes.
Great. Thank you for great questions. All right. Person in the back.
Hi, everyone. Tahita Mateen with the United States Small Business Administration, SBA. So thank you for all of the input. We are looking into the issues that we received from Tanya in an email. So we are pushing that up further to make sure that we can get some answers for you all. Also, we are still in the area making sure that people understand that the long-term recovery and the resiliency is what we want to try to get to the communities now. What does that look like? That looks like making sure that business owners understand how to prepare for the next disaster that may hit this area, getting them on the right track and reaccepted for their current disaster loans, making sure that we use other SBA programs, which means letting the community know that they can be government certified to help out with the next disaster that may happen. So a lot of long-term things that we are working on. Most of you have my information, but I will hang around so that I can make sure you have my business cards. Any way that we can continue to support the area with the SBA information and how we can look deeper into these applications, please let me know. And it's good to see you all again.
Great. Thank you for being here and being present at so many of our events. There's also a hand in the middle there too, Jason.
Hi, Lindsay Finnair. I live on Pine Island, so according to the survey, I represent all of unincorporated Lee County, which I think with the exception of Kevin, nobody else on the area up there that's been talking does. So on the topic of unincorporated Lee County and the need for more representation, particularly when it comes to community, because we don't have elected officials doing that for us other than our county commissioners, who of course their time is very largely being argued for by the city leaders who are elected to represent their particular smaller areas. So there's a lot of talk about affordability. There's a lot of talk about keeping Lee County a multi-generational area so that people don't graduate high school and immediately have to leave and never come back. There's a lot of question of affordability, and do we go with more density? Do we go with less density? There's a really simple solution that I haven't heard being considered that I would like to just put out there for people to think about. A lot of people don't know this. Modular housing is Florida state certified housing. It's considered equivalent to site-built stick homes. So for an entry fee of about $350,000, you can put what looks like a mobile home on your property, regardless of its zoning. But you can't put a HUD certified Wind Zone 3 manufactured home made in the same facility to the same standards, with the exception that the manufactured home is built on a steel I-beam, which adds strength and is used for transportation, as well as not having to hire a crane to put it up on a stem wall. So for $100,000, you can get a virtual, indistinguishable manufactured home as long as it's Wind Zone 3 and new. That's the only stipulation I would ask for in considering rezoning, that it be new, that it be HUD certified Wind Zone 3, manufactured to be considered equivalent to modular for the purpose of zoning and new construction, which would help with low income, it would help with moderate income, it would help with the insurance because it would get people to a place where they can self-insure faster, that in the event that they do need to not wait for insurance, that they can replace it on their own, haul out the old one, bring the new one back before the insurance companies typically even write a check out. My second recommendation.
Yeah, 1 minute.
Thank you. Would be to consider shifting property tax. There's a very small population that considers that is homesteaded. And because so many groups have been exempted now from homesteaded property tax, those that remain have a huge burden now, making up for everybody else. I would ask Jenna specifically if the state would please consider either having an increase in sales tax or a shift from some kind of a transfer for qualified sales of property so that homesteaded properties are no longer subject to property tax. Because the idea that you work your entire life, you save, you live as modestly
Okay.
as possible
All right.
to pay off your
Time, please.
house, and then you can still have your house taken because you're not paying annually. You're
Okay.
renting from the
Thank you.
government.
All right. There's a lady right there in the middle.
My question is brief, so I probably could yield my time to her. I'm just seeking for a calendar of the meetings that will prevent a scavenger hunt through the website, trying to determine when the meetings are. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. We should be able to deliver on that one for you. Okay, gentleman in the middle. And was there a hand up in the front row?
My name is Mike Love. Regarding housing, the Lee County AMI figures just recently came out. And over the last 2 weeks, we have been running the figures. And to the best of our ability, we can't really build homes with these. My question then, will the branches deal with any regulation, any code, any type of law that will create low-income house credits? Because what we have now, we can't build homes. We cannot get mortgages based on this.
Great. Thank you for that point. Anyone else? Okay. One more gentleman up front.
Thank you, Jim Schwartzel. I'm glad to see you guys are starting to make some progress, it appears. Councilwoman Smith mentioned earlier about getting a complete list of all the submitted projects for the CDBG-DR acronym. Will that be made available to the public so that we can see what's being submitted as well? Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you all for your attendance. Turn it over to Commissioner Ruane as chair.
I appreciate everyone's attendance. I know it's Memorial Day weekend and I appreciate the discussions. I thought they were lively. If at any point in time during these meetings, if we feel like we need to get another meeting in for the month, because we're going to get up to some deadlines where there's going to be some anxiety, I'm more than open to call and coordinate with y'all because I think we're going to hit some deadlines that we're going to want help and we're going to want collaboration. Thank you. Appreciate your help today.